The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Greetings, everyone, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Andreas Benokritis, and I'm a product manager for content and certification with Ansible Automation at Red Hat. And I'll be your moderator for today. Now, we've got a special crew for you. We're going to call this a Taste of Ansible Fest, which is starting next week. We're super excited. We want to get a taste of, we want to give you all just a little bit about what you would probably get at Ansible Fest early. So a special treat for you. And today our webinar is titled Reduce and Possibly Eliminate Microservice Application Downtime Using Ansible. Our primary presenter is Matt Quill, and he's from F5 Networks. And we also have the rest of the crew from F5 that will be fielding questions during his presentation. Now, before we begin, Matt is a senior strategic business development manager for F5, and he lives in the Boston area. He is a Cam Newton fan, so that's great to hear, since that's a new addition to the team. And he's looking forward to speaking with you all about microservices application downtime. But again, before I begin, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. Just want to let you know this is the first time you're on a webinar with us with Ansible. All participants, all of y'all will be on mute for the duration of the webinar, so don't worry. There's no way you can unmute or anything like that. But if you have any questions during the presentation, we ask that you use the little questions. You'll see a little section of the GoToWebinar control panel. It says questions there. So if you have any questions during the presentation, we ask that you use that area to ask questions, and the F5 crew will answer them timely. And if we have time at the end, we will address a lot of them if we have some common questions. So last but not least, this webinar is being recorded. Don't worry, right? So if you are late to here, you have coworkers that can't make it, or you have to drop early, we will be making this webinar available on demand on the training and webinar section of Ansible.com shortly. And you'll get an email regardless. So don't worry about any of that. You're going to get an email when we post this, and we'll have the video, and maybe we get the slides too from the F5 team. So enough of me. Without further ado, let's kick things off to Matt Quill from F5. Matt?
Thank you, Andreas. And yeah, Cam Newton makes the Patriots interesting and kind of excited. Hope he gets better and can be back to playing soon, because that last game was painful. As Andreas mentioned, Matt Quill. I'm responsible for the Red Hat partnership at F5, and that encompasses the entire Red Hat portfolio, from Ansible to Red Hat Core, and we have integrations across the board, which I'll discuss. What we're going to talk today about is really making Ansible real, taking a real-world use case and a pain point that's been identified by some of our customers, by many of our joint customers, and by certain persons internal to Red Hat as well. We're going to talk about how we came up with a solution using Ansible technology in combination with Red Hat's OpenShift container platform to effect successful migrations. Now, for those of you who are not OpenShift customers, not prospective OpenShift customers, this is still a best practice automation use case that you can implement in any environment, whether it's a containerized environment, a virtual environment, or what have you. But we're going to talk about the particular pain points that we're addressing with this global server load balancing tool, how we've packaged it up and built all the automations and standardized all the automations in Ansible. And I think it's a quite compelling use case for how we can sort of merge the two products together, how one can complement the other. Ansible can complement OpenShift, and F5 can help solve business challenges for our mutual customers. So I have on the line with me my technical team, because obviously if someone throws me a curveball, I'll need some additional support, but we're going to walk through this process right now. So just a little bit, I won't go into too much detail about F5 as a business, but it's important to understand where we sit in the data center. F5 sort of sits at layer 4 to 7 of the OSI stack and has been sort of the dominant player for the last 20 years. We've gone through multiple iterations. We were founded in 1996. Our name is based on the movie Twister, because our founder went to Twister beforehand. But we're a very healthy, growing company with a very healthy balance sheet. Like many organizations that relied on selling best of breed, let's say box solutions that could get very big and handle a lot of throughput, we continue to do very, very well in that business. However, we understand that customers are looking at digital transformation, new consumption models from a software perspective, and new ways of doing business, right? Whether new ways of deploying applications, whether it's on cloud, on-prem, in a hybrid manner. And they're also looking at new ways of developing applications. So you'll hear themes like microservices, agile development, things of that nature. And a key component of that all is automation. You have to develop code fast. You have to automate everything you can and sort of transform it into code and deploy as rapidly as possible and roll back changes as quickly as possible if, for example, you make a mistake or the configuration is not proper. So agile development really closely correlates with automation, i.e. Ansible and all the wonderful things that it does and the ease with which it does it, and microservices, which is containers. So we're merging these two worlds together, and F5 has a strong role to play in multiple delivery models. So what are our integrations? There are three key integrations, okay? We have Red Hat OpenShift, which is our container ingress services, and our Nginx, which was an acquisition about a year ago, that is foundational to our strategy and our transition to a software company, which has a Kubernetes ingress controller. We have what are called operators for both products out on the Red Hat Operator HUD, which means that we're aligned and ready to integrate and work with OpenShift 4x. And we have planned to sort of align our development strategy with Red Hat's. So we're that closely aligned. We have continuous integration discussions. With Ansible, likewise, we had multiple modules on Ansible, and we've now transitioned to having collections on Ansible Automation Hub for both Nginx and F5. So we've really started to align our vision and our development strategy and our integration strategy with Red Hat Ansible's integration strategy. And fundamental in helping to guide us through that process have been great people within Red Hat like Andreas, who have helped make sure that we're aligned and that we're in constant communication and that we are developing best practices so that you, the customer, the end user, can consume these in the most effective manner possible. So now on to the use case. So when we talk about we're using this as an example, and OpenShift is essentially the most meaningful non-public cloud container platform on the market today. So when you think about the Kubernetes distribution from a containers perspective, Kubernetes as an open source project has effectively won the game. And from an on-premises deployment, OpenShift is the preferred on-premises or hybrid or multi-cloud solution. If you want to deploy across multiple clouds or in a hybrid manner, public and private cloud, having the abstraction layer of OpenShift and the standardization of OpenShift rather than looking at specific tools is important. But there are a couple of challenges when we think about it, and really when we think about any sort of business problem that we have. The first is availability, right? We're thinking about how we sort of make sure that that application is available and fault tolerant against regional outages, failover of applications, loss of hardware, all of those things. And in typical enterprise DNS services, a lot of features that are not available in a typical DNS environment are available. F5 offers. So a traditional DNS doesn't have a global server load balancing offering. So there's no ability to sort of monitor an application in site A and then seamlessly switch over to site B if, for example, that application is not available or there's an outage or a hardware failure or what have you. GSLB allows for that seamless transition because it's monitoring the primary as well as the secondary in a very simple terms. There are lots of different load balancing algorithms, and we'll get into that. There are no real health checks on the application status. So think of us when we talk about layer 4 through 7 really the sweet spot is layer 7, the application layer. That intelligence that F5 brings to the table is very important. But not understanding the health of your application is kind of leaving you blind, right? Essentially, you don't have insight into whether or not that application is healthy. You may be able to sort of ping it, you may be able to sort of understand that the VM or the container is up, but you may not know the necessary health of the application. There's no IP intelligence in traditional DNS. So geolocation, so making sure that users are directed to the closest resource, or users who do not have access to a resource because they happen to be, let's say, in North Korea, are not able to access a particular application resource. And there's not really an API automation. There's no API enablement, no automation in traditional DNS. Now, we understand very carefully that when we think about Ansible and automation and all of these all the richness that it brings, APIs are the future, right? Sort of taking all of the brain power that we all collectively have and putting it into code so that we can iterate in an iterative fashion, deploy applications is crucial. And so having an API with all of the richness and breadth and depth that you need in order to effectively sort of automate your environment is crucial in order to sort of execute forward. And we talk about things like digital transformation, but this is really important. If you don't have a robust, well-documented and rich API, the automation is really not easy. It's very difficult, in fact, and you're relying on things like scripts and so forth, and CLI automations, which are less than ideal. So in this particular OCP cluster, we've been stuck in a cul-de-sac of a single cluster deployment. We might have a small deployment. We might be testing Agile, and we might be looking at developing microservices applications. Okay, but we're really not there yet. You know, this is a departmental deployment, a small-scale deployment. We're kicking the tires, but aspirationally, we as a business, let's say we're the business folks, we need to transform the way that we do business. We need to adopt microservices. We need to make everything as code, as much of our operation as code and as much automation as possible. And we need to scale out our microservices footprint. We need to sort of be able to flexibly move to cloud, adopt hybrid, and migrate when the time is right. So what does F5 do, right? It adds flexibility to OpenShift clusters, both from our LTM, which is our core load balancing perspective. In the data center, we can sort of do cross load balancing intelligence, cross cluster intelligence by load balancing and doing granular traffic control, so north-south into it, but also at a macro level view as we zoom out to multiple data centers and multiple sites. We can sort of deal with clusters. Now, what's important to understand from an F5 perspective is that now we have a SaaS offering for this GSLB offering. So it's something that sits in the cloud. We still have appliances or virtual appliances that you can purchase, but we now have a global cloud load balancer that you can utilize quite easily with that. And this allows for you to seamlessly bring GSLB technologies into your environment at a low ongoing cost, right? With upfront free trials and things like that while you get up and running. There's no appliance to manage, nothing in your data center. It's a cloud-based solution that allows you to realize or fully realize the value of global cloud load balancing. It directs traffic to the nearest instance. So if, for example, a user is in California, it understands via geolocation that that user is in California. If the user is in Boston, as I am, it understands that user is in Boston and will direct them to the nearest resource. It also understands users that shouldn't be accessing that information. It routes traffic for GDPR compliancy, which for global companies is very important. And it can split load across compute instances. So if you want to do basic round-robin load balancing across compute instances, across availability zones in places like AWS, you may do so. And it's important to understand that while we continue to have a DNS product that offers the same richness, we now have a service offering that can be delivered by cloud that you can utilize quite quickly and with a low entry cost. And finally, it's important to understand that there's built-in DDoS protection. So malicious actors, basic denial of services attacks, we protect against those types of attack vectors and can recognize them. And then it's fully configurable via APIs. Crucial when we're talking about Ansible, when we're talking about automation, when we're talking about the significant cultural shift within the organization, this is how it works. So this is the vision that we want to help Red Hat realize and our customers realize. And it has several components. I'm just going to build out this cluster and kind of show a situation, right? So let's say, for example, now you have multiple OpenShift deployments in multiple locations. We built, using Ansible playbooks and Ansible automation technologies, what we call a GSLB tool. This is something that is free. It's available on GitHub. It's something that anyone can use, consume. They can fork it and they can modify it and update it as it works. In this particular scenario, we have 3 OpenShift deployments. And let's assume, for example, that these are 3 different OpenShift deployments running the same applications, but in 3 different sites. And so we need to load balance between these different sites. GSLB tool kind of glues together the GSLB APIs. So it makes sure that your continuous delivery operations, whether that's an individual doing DevOps type processes or a DevOps process. And then you also have your source of truth, which is, in this case, GitHub. It minimizes the operational errors. So you're not taking this very involved, fairly complex set of sequences, which is you discover the routes on your OpenShift clusters, you sort of populate your config in advance, and then you commit your config. So it minimizes the operations because now you've automated the whole process to do the migration. But again, because this is free and available to all of our mutual customers or not, those who are not our customers, it's a tool that you can use, modify, and populate with GSLB. And then finally, it populates via API calls the configuration or the desired state that you want. In this case, what we're mostly looking at are migrations. So a lot of our mutual customers on OpenShift are at version 3x. We use this GSLB tool to inquire of the routes, publish into GSLB, and then execute a migration from point A to point B. Most importantly, minimizing overall downtime and minimizing errors. And it allows for the swift application rollout across clusters, whether that be in multiple data centers, A/B type deployment, canary type deployment sequences. We can really go into a lot of different types of deployment scenarios or agile development methodologies that we'd like to utilize. And GSLB, in combination with our local traffic manager, provides that sort of granular traffic control. And so I would invite you to sort of reach out and discuss, and we could brainstorm how we could affect that, whether it's an OpenShift deployment or not. And it manages all the routes of a given project at once, like Red Hat's migration tools. So it manages the whole process of migrating and load balancing between locations. So it's important to understand this GSLB tool that we've built, while optimized for cloud services and initially built for cloud services, we can also use it with our big IP DNS product, which is for a purchase product that is still freely available either in hardware or virtual edition, and is deployed quite widely with a number of our customers. So depending upon whether or not you have a GSLB tool product in-house, this tool can work with both. It talks to both API sets, and it can seamlessly affect these migrations from point A to point B. Whoop. I go to the next slide. So it's also something that could work with Kubernetes. So if you're migrating from Kubernetes to OpenShift, you may do so as well. So the project commands sort of operate on a project namespace. It retrieves all the layer 7 routes from either the OpenShift or the Kubernetes environment. We have many customers who have deployed at small scale Kubernetes and are now looking for a more fully supported QA'd, commercial offering that is still open source, like with OpenShift. And we see a lot of customers looking to move from Kubernetes to OpenShift because, yes, it's great. Kubernetes project is great and robust, but they want world-class service and support, and they want to make sure that the product is solid and reliable. So we have our desired state, the GSLB tool. You have the project populate, project evacuate, and then the project ratios. GSLB operates on the Git repository in the GSLB API and making sort of both the active and the desired state, okay? And then once we commit the config, so we retrieve the commit from one location and then we add the commit to the other location. So there's a process whereby we configure the desired state and then we commit the desired state. And all of this process and all of this busy work and all this automation is handled via this GSLB tool. And then of course, we have built in that fault tolerance, the failback switch, the GSLB rollback that will prevent incorrect configs or early configs or errors. We can roll this back to its previous state. So we do this, and it's a fairly exhaustive process where we're offloading a lot of the intelligence that's required to do this. A lot of the manual process is sort of built into the GSLB tool so that we can sort of define the desired state, then commit the desired state, and if necessary, not likely, but if necessary, roll back from that desired state. So just a little bit on the Ansible playbooks anatomy. I'll show you at the end kind of where you can retrieve these playbooks, but we have sort of the variable files. For those of you who understand Ansible, it's written in fairly straight language. The lovely thing about Ansible as a product is it's agentless compared to some of the legacy automation tools, and it's very simple to get up to speed on Ansible. But the GSLB tool was built 100% using Ansible, and it sort of talks about the product, and this is particularly the project retrieve type YAML with all of the different integrations and configurations. So we have our variable files with the credentials as well as the setup, and then the state, the desired state that you're looking for in this file. And this is in the Ansible Vault. Then we have the sort of host, which is the API endpoint of the router, and so forth. That's important to know, and these are configurable. And then sort of the roles that we're looking to sort of implement, the init and project folder. And so the main Ansible roles are a single declarative interface. So we're moving from what historically was sort of an imperative model to a more declarative model, where we send a JSON file in one fell swoop. That makes it overall much more efficient. And it also is important to understand that while routes is really the preferred method for OpenShift, we also can support ingress as well, which is something that is in Kubernetes and previous versions of OpenShift. And the desired state can be managed with both cloud services and big IP DNS by a single declarative interface. So from a backend, we have the login, the prepare config, and the publish. And also relies on the JSON query utility to build this GSLB declaration. A little further information on the Ansible playbooks anatomy, where you sort of have the setup YAML, the variable file, which is the GSLB zone, the base domain, the backend that you're looking to point to, as well as the on-prem and AWS. So for example, in this use case, we have a configuration that's in AWS and a configuration that is on-prem. And so we've defined as such the URLs of those two locations, the URIs of those two locations. And then we have the resource types as routes, and then the on-prem public IP addresses for both AWS as well as our on-prem configuration. All of this is in straightforward and clear language. Even someone as technically unskilled, such as myself, could decipher what this means. So the most compelling thing from a short-term perspective that we've seen with our GSLB services is essentially migration. A lot of our customers, our mutual customers, are looking to migrate. We've built this GSLB tool, and so the process is fairly straightforward. We have our enterprise DNS. We then change the authoritative DNS for zone ocp.company.com to make F5 the authoritative DNS for that particular zone. We provision the GSLB SaaS with just a credit card, but in fact, our plan is to have a 30-day free trial. So setup and configuration can happen for free. You populate the GSLB, which is all automated, and then you test the DNS and GSLB in applications. Then you deploy the new OCP cluster, okay? And then you start migrating. Now, migrations aren't performed in a single pass. This is a fairly complex process, especially the larger your deployment, the more complex your deployment. But GSLB is a key factor. Introducing GSLB services is a key factor in facilitating that. And the automations that we've built around that with Ansible help to make that process faster, reduce the risk and likelihood of outages, and ensure that the transition for end users, and really the end users are the consumers of the applications, whether they are individual internal users or customers, let's say, is as seamless as possible. So while these migrations are happening on a continuous basis, you still see a consistent image, a consistent experience of that application functioning as advertised. GSLB has the built-in intelligence to perform the cutover and the redirection of those resources properly. So the user is not disruptive, outages are minimized, or most likely eliminated, and all of the automations are built in. So transitioning from there, let's talk a little bit about next steps and how you can get more information. My colleague Ulysses has an excellent YouTube video that I would encourage you to take a look at. It's about a 30-minute in length video, but it gets very far down into the weeds about how this would work in practice. We have details on the Red Hat as well as the Ansible partnerships on f5.com. But I want to take you to sort of the GitHub repo right now. Whoop, that's not fun. And show you the details. You know what we've produced for you. I see here you have all of the documentation and the introduction about how the GSLB tool functions, all of the information and the use cases, for example, data center load distribution with GSLB, an enhanced customer experience, advanced blue, green, and AB and canary deployment options, which we would love to discuss with you in more detail, but that's a very involved, complex discussion. But how F5 technologies, a combination of our DNS, whether GSLB as a service or our DNS products, combined with our LTM, combined with our Nginx for microservices load balancing, combined with our security portfolio, like our advanced WAF or our access and identity management product, SSL VPN product called APM. How all of that kind of fits together into a very large picture, and how most of that functionality is automated via APN, via Ansible, excuse me. And so we look at the overall architecture. We can pull out this little animation that is very similar to what I've shown via slides, and you'll see the sort of how this process works. Ulysses has done an excellent job in providing an animation. We see similar to what we had in the slides, but with a little bit more depth in that. You see both either Kubernetes or OpenShift. We can inquire the routes. We can publish the layer 7 routes to GSLB. Okay. We understand that it's either cloud services or big IP. And the users are actually pointing, when they're looking at apps accessing their applications, the GSLB. And then health checks are running continuously on the OpenShift clusters, plural. Now, all of these automations, all of the intelligence that Ulysses has built into this overall configuration is there. And I would encourage you to visit GitHub to look at it, look at the code, understand what we're trying to do, while our focus as an organization, as a team, is on the Red Hat partnership and advancing the Red Hat partnership and building customer-based focused projects that advance the cause of OpenShift and Ansible as it relates to F5. There are ultimately many use cases that we can use Ansible automations for, whether it's migrations, whether it's inserting GSLB into an environment, a legacy environment based on VMs and so forth. And so there are lots of use cases that we could consider and will build towards. So look at the GitHub repository. I would also encourage you, if you have questions, my contact info is Matt Quill. My name is Matt Quill, and it's m.quill@f5.com. We would certainly love to workshop with you and think through whiteboard particular scenarios that you're looking to automate. We always love customer feedback because that helps to really guide our decision making and the effort that we put into certain projects. So with that, I'd like to open up the floor to any questions.
Okay, I think we had a few here, and maybe if the rest of the team could be off mute, if they could maybe cue some questions to Matt Quill, we can get going. Was there any in the chat?
I don't see any questions directly in the chat.
So maybe
I see a question now.
Okay. So one of the questions that came up, Matt, was, you talked a little about getting started. Obviously, Kubernetes containerization and OpenShift can be daunting, right? So
yes,
what is the best way to and maybe it's a leading question, is like, how do you piece this out, right? How do you get started? Like, I know it can be, there is an end goal here. What's the best way to get going? I know with automation, it's getting some of the, in general, is automating the tasks you hate, right? What's the low-hanging fruit? So what would be like the equivalent of low-hanging fruit for something like this?
Yeah, so one of the things, I think one of the challenges that happens with the deployment of containers or adopting containers is that what goes in concert with that is that you're fundamentally changing the way that you do application development. You're fundamentally changing your culture because you're adopting agile methodologies, right? You're looking at taking traditional, let's say, 3-tier applications and breaking them out into microservices, right? Because containers dovetail nicely with microservices. So that there's a steep learning curve, or a somewhat steep learning curve, in how you're going to change your culture, your business, your application development process, and then there's the technology challenges of doing deployment and doing these type of things at scale. The way that I've looked at it is one of the things that's been very nice in working with Red Hat generally is that they just announced the release of Azure Red Hat OpenShift, which is essentially the easy button for deploying OpenShift. So if you want a single cluster experience and you want to kick the tires in OpenShift and really understand the value that OpenShift and containers more generally bring, I would go to a cloud provider like Azure or AWS. I think is about to have or has a similar offering where they have a managed service. You don't have to think about all the setup and all the moving pieces and parts, and you can start to play. Automation is obviously a well understood story and very easy to understand. But if you think about automation and you think about the end state vision that you have for your organization, which is solving a business problem, making sure that you can be more adaptive, making sure that your time to value is faster, making sure that customers can start consuming applications immediately, and making sure that you can introduce new features and functionalities and updates to applications in a rapid and iterative manner. If you think about all of those changes that need to happen, you'll probably, once you play with containers, understand how that fits into the overall vision. And I would encourage people to start small and probably start on a cloud. Similar to the way you started automation, which is, I hate doing this process over and over again, or twisting these knobs or pushing these buttons. I want to automate this so I never have to think about it again. That's the exact same way you do it. You start very small, you understand the business problem that you're trying to attack, and then you find a way to sort of scale it out.
I just got another question that came in. What are the requirements to run this tool?
There are no requirements. This is a free and open source tool.
So maybe I can take that, right? So
go ahead.
Sure. So first of all, you need to subscribe to F5 cloud service, right? You need to have create an account and subscribe to the service, get the DNS load balancing service subscribed there. So then you can start to configure this, download the code from the GitHub. So then you can start to configure the credential to access your cluster, right? Provide the API endpoints as Matt mentioned in the setup configuration file. So then from there, one other thing you need to install is the JSON query utility, right? On top of Ansible. So you can, from there, you can start using this tool.
Perfect.
Looks like another question came in. What is the best way to import the F5 image into RHEV instead of in OpenShift?
Yeah, so if you're using the virtual edition of our product, we have support for Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization, as well as KVM, which is kind of the open source project that supports Rev. So, we have the traditional VE by that company whose name will not be mentioned, but we also have a VE for KVM and Red Hat Virtualization.
And I think it's good to understand that a lot of the underpinnings of Rev are being integrated into OpenShift, so that hopefully it'll make your life a little bit easier. The Rev implementations, as far as I'm not a Rev expert, but I do know that the means to have external providers, external source providers for Rev is going to become a little bit easier as that situation happens. But in the short term, I think what Matt Quill said stands is maybe we can get offline. This doesn't sound like something you should be having an issue with, and I think there's a quick resolution to that.
Correct. And yeah, OpenShift virtualization is obviously the future of managing VMs in concert with containers. And so they're making it easier for you to manage both worlds with through a single pane of glass. And I would encourage you to look at OpenShift virtualization, and F5, again, is aligning with that vision. So we actually, with a particular customer in mind, the telco vertical, are actually doing that right now. Jointly with Red Hat.
Here's another question. Are there any limitations with any version of OpenShift?
So from a validation perspective, it's important to understand that we validated this on a 3x to 4x basis. That's sort of the meat of our population, but we could look at, and the bulk of people who are at 3x are at 3.11, looking to migrate to 4x. Have we gone back to previous versions of 3x? No, but we could certainly discuss how that would happen, how we could do that.
I actually have a question if you want. So Matt, I've got a question. So let's just say that we have a lot of, since this is on Ansible.com, we probably have a lot of big IP admins, right? All they do is big IP all day, every day, and that's cool. And they see this and they're like deer in headlights a little bit, maybe. So like, what would be the next things, like, in order to get to this space, right? What are some activities for a big IP administrator? What are some to-dos or activities, right, to get them started into moving into this world?
Yeah, so obviously, probably many of the customers on this call are looking at our big IP admins and so forth. And automation is probably the first step, right? You are looking to automate, therefore you're interested in Ansible. Matt Mavis, I think perhaps you could sort of guide them, because I think you've done some series on, getting up to speed in 30 days or becoming an Ansible expert in 30 days. Could you sort of talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah, my past was the company that shall not be named. Starts with a V, ends with an E. But I worked for them for almost 7 years, and I spent a lot of time doing automation with their platforms. Never touched Red Hat once. I got assigned to it as kind of a, learn this process, come to Ansible Fest, learn more. Within 30 days, I had my own playbooks running. After that 30 days, into the next 30 days, I had roles built. Now I'm considered one of the experts in our business development lab, where I actually develop scripts that integrate and deploy network switch solutions with Ansible, deploying virtual machines through Ansible, configuring them almost even all the way up to installation of software, basically building virtual labs instantly within 30-35 minutes. That's the dream, right? Being able to create a sandbox lab within 30-35 minutes that could do whatever you want it to do.
We are also, one of the other things for the big IP folks on the phone, we have some upcoming test drive Tuesdays that we're running on October 16th, and I believe the follow-up is in November. This will get you your feet wet on using Ansible. Matt and Payal, who are on the phone, Payal Singh, will be leading these two events, and I would encourage you to register and sign up, because this will allow you to sort of roll up your sleeves and understand automation more fully and utilize it in practice as it specifically relates to big IP. I know we're zooming out towards an end state solution set, but if we're talking about getting started with automation, I think that's an excellent first step.
Yeah, there's another question about what is the security method to secure the data during the migration. So I probably can take that.
Sure.
So we are using the Ansible Vault so you can encrypt all the variables and files that you can protect the sensitive data, right? The content to do that, yeah, sure. Yeah, such as the credentials to the clusters and also the out state files. So we are using Ansible Vault to encrypt those data.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Eric.
I think we're pretty much good to go. I don't think we're going to take too much time for others. Were there any other questions? If not, we can wrap it up.
I think we're good to go.
Awesome. Well, we want to say thank you so much, Matt Quill, Matt Mavis, Eric, Pyle, all y'all that were on this. Really excited to have you. Thank you again for experiencing this taste of Ansible Fest for all you out there. Just a reminder, Ansible Fest is next Tuesday and Wednesday. That's October 13th and 14th. You can sign up. It's free. So you can go to ansible.com/AnsibleFest and take a look at there. And we will continue to have really good Ansible content with F5. F5 is a fantastic partner. Continue to have them on. Feel free to let us know how we did. If you have any topics we can deep dive in. We've had a bunch on the NGINX side. Really happy to have them part of the team as well. So with that, I want to say thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you the next time, I guess. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.